Hey guys, Political Junkie 2414 here, and welcome back to my next election prediction video. So today we're going to be looking at looking at my update on the 2022 U.S. gubernatorial elections, or governor elections. Gubernatorial is the official term. We got quite a few races up this year. Sorry yesterday's video was very long for the Senate elections. I think that's my longest video on this channel ever. um, Longer than the first governor's election map or election prediction video that I made originally. But yeah, let's get right into it. Hope y'all are having a great day. Don't expect a bi-weekly update like usual for the governor's election map next time, because I got, some more stuff coming up in the next couple of weeks. So expect it like maybe September 1st or September 2nd, maybe the 3rd of September. So expect it roughly around there for my next update. It unless I decide to update a little bit earlier than that. But anyways, let's get right into it. We're gonna start filling in the safe Democratic and Republican states. These are states that are going to almost definitely go to the incumbent parties, or I guess it depends on what you're particularly looking at. These are states that are going to go to the Democratic or Republican parties, or Republican Party by safe margins, 15%, with 15 percentage points or higher is a safe margin. And the only reason why you may I think that these races are competitive, or question the competitiveness of it, is because you play this little what if game. It's something I went over in my last election prediction video of the Senate yesterday. So essentially, it's what I mean by that is, what if California goes red, or what if Idaho goes blue? We know California is probably not going to go red. Gavin Newsom is pretty popular there, easily avoided his recall. The incumbent Republican in Idaho, Brad Little, is in a very heavily Republican state. He did have an interesting primary. His lieutenant governor had the Trump endorsement and ran against him. Little easily won that primary, and he's going to cruise to victory in the general election. You may be surprised to see Vermont and New Hampshire as safe states for the GOP. I know kind of think it's a little interesting to see them as such, but the states have very popular Republican incumbents. Phil Scott in Vermont, Kristen Sununu in New Hampshire, pretty moderate to liberal Republicans, Rockefeller Republicans. Yeah, they are both going to soar to re-election. Easily won the re-elections in 2020. If you're wondering why they were up in 2020 and not 2018, they were up in 2018. Vermont and New Hampshire, the only two states in the country that elect their governors every 2 years instead of every 4 years. It's kind of an old tradition of some states, but Vermont and New Hampshire, the only states that have not shied away from it yet. I imagine they will someday, but that is not today. Um, for a couple of other states that we can take a look at on here, Iowa and Ohio, I have a safe. Iowa, Kim Reynolds is the incumbent Republican governor, was appointed to replace Terry Bradstand or Branstad, after he was appointed, or after he was nominated to, I think he was ambassador to China in the Trump administration. Kim Reynolds faced a pretty tough race in 2018, a blue wave year. She only won by about 3 points against Fred Hubble. This was actually an upset. She was expected to lose. But the Democratic candidate this year, Deidre DeGear, is not doing very well in polling. I don't really know a lot about her campaign. From my understanding, it's pretty progressive, and is not really working to appeal to more of those white working class voters that Trump was able to win over in the state of Iowa. And Kim Reynolds, despite her being, controversial figure nationwide, she didn't really handle COVID-19 very well, in my opinion. But she is going to cruise to re-election. Same with Mike DeWine in Ohio. He had a tough Republican primary for his COVID restrictions, but he's going to soar to re-election. Ohio is not a state that is afraid to re-elect its Republican governors by very large margins. Just take John Kasich in Ohio, or John Kasich in 2014, or Robert Taft in 2002. I believe he had some relation to William Howard Taft. But yeah, so Mike DeWine is also facing off against Nan Whaley, who's a very progressive candidate. And, I did have this race as likely previously. I'm going to move it back up to safe. The conservative independent Neil Peterson could have made this race interesting. But I think Mike DeWine, he has the clear advantage here in the state of Ohio. Pretty popular with independents, even with some Democrats. Nan really doesn't really have a chance here in the state of Ohio. We're going to look at a couple of the safe Democratic states. We actually have a couple of flips here with Maryland and Massachusetts. These states actually have incumbent Republican governors right now. Larry Hogan in Maryland, Charlie Baker in Massachusetts. Larry Hogan was term limited in Maryland, but he endorsed in the Republican primary Kelly Schultz, who was a more moderate candidate against the Trump endorsed candidate Dan Cox, who's a more extreme far right candidate. Cox ultimately won the primary. It was a loss for Larry Hogan. And these two incumbents are pretty popular, but since Hogan is term limited in Maryland and Charlie Baker is not running due to a primary threat from Trump in Massachusetts, the governorships will return to Democratic hands come next year. In Rhode Island, there's an interesting primary there with the incumbent Democratic governor, Dan McKee. We're going to have to see what happens with that. That's actually in a couple of weeks now, in September. I think it's September 6th, if I remember. Maybe September 13th. I don't know. It's one of the last primaries. There is some talk about Rhode Island potentially being competitive. Its governor races have been pretty competitive. Gina Raimondo, of course, was the governor before Dan McKee. She's now in the Biden administration. She did, have a hard time against Alan Fung. She only won by 16 points in Rhode Island in a blue wave year, but Fung was a very, moderate to liberal Republican. He is running for U.S. House right now. He could actually flip a seat in Rhode Island, possibly become the first congressional Republican from Rhode Island in quite some time to be in Congress. So that'll be interesting. McKee's facing off against a pretty bad, or against a pretty good. He's facing a tough primary right now. I do expect him to lose that primary. But I don't really see how the state this could become likely. But recently, I've had the state as safe Democratic. It definitely will go Democratic. It's just a margin that's kind of, a little questioning for me. But we'll just have to wait and see what happens. I don't think the Republicans have a very good candidate to run. There is, Ashley Cowus, I think, or Cowus is how you say her name. She has the endorsement of the Rhode Island GOP. And Rhode Island is definitely a state that's trending Republican, but I still do not think that it is going to go red, especially with a Republican leaning environment, but Rhode Island's still the blue state. It has some interesting politics, but it voted for Biden by over 20%. All right, so let's get into the likely states. These are states that are going to be decided for the Democratic or Republican Party by a margin of 5 to 15 percentage points. These are competitive states, but not necessarily the most competitive. We'll look at the Democratic states right now, likely Democratic states right now. In Colorado, Jared Polis is going to do pretty well. I did have this state briefly as safe, but that was in between predictions. This state has been likely for quite some time. Colorado's moved farther and farther to the left. It voted for Biden by 14 points in 2020. In 2018, Polis won his first election by 11. I expect that to go up. Colorado Republicans have done a better job than other statewide GOPs at nominating more electable candidates. But Polis is extremely popular in Colorado, and I think he'll win by around 13 to 14 points. In Illinois, I could see the state going safe. J.B. Pritzker isn't as unpopular as some people may say. But he did win by only 16 points in 2018. This was against a Republican incumbent. And, Tammy Duckworth will help him. I think that she will win by a safe margin. But Illinois could be likely or safe. Victory Research is a Republican sponsored poll here. It shows Pritzker under 50%, which is concerning for him. But Darren Bailey is not that great of a candidate. He's more of a Trumpy kind of candidate. And, I've heard people say, oh, well, he did really well in the Chicago suburbs in the Republican primary. It was a primary, guys. What about the general election? J.B. Pritzker is still pretty popular in this state. Illinois is a blue state. It is going to vote for J.B. Pritzker again. So yeah. In Michigan, this is a big one. Gretchen Whitmer has gotten super lucky. We've had the primaries here a couple of weeks ago. It was actually the day after my last prediction. Tudor Dixon won the primary, as I correctly predicted. She's not a very good candidate, made some pretty controversial statements on abortion, and Whitmer was very vulnerable before. I actually thought at one time that she was more vulnerable than Tony Evers in the state of Wisconsin, believe it or not, But, since January, I've really had this race as lean Democratic. Recently, I've put it as likely after James Craig, the Republican frontrunner, got disqualified. And yeah, I think that's where it's going to stay for right now. Connecticut could also be an interesting race. Ned Lamont is running for his reelection. Connecticut's governor races are surprisingly competitive. In 2018, Lamont won his first election by only 3 points against Bob Stefanowski. He was a pretty good Republican candidate. He is coming back to challenge Lamont, but as we know, or as most of us know, rerun candidates do not typically do very well unless the environment is more favorable to them. Well, I mean that depends. This is a redder environment than it was in 2018, but Lamont isn't quite as unpopular as some people say. I think his approval is like 10 is like a net. He has a net approval of about 10 points, so that's pretty okay. And Connecticut's a blue state. Richard Blumenthal's gonna, win his Senate election pretty easily, and I think, Lamont is in a comfortable place right now. So that's it for the likely blue states. We're gonna fill in the likely red states. First one is is the state of Alaska. We got Mike Dunleavy running for his reelection in the state of Alaska. He might have a potentially competitive race on his hands with the ranked choice voting system in the state of Alaska. Basically, it's a system where you rank all of your candidate. You rank your first choice for a certain office, then your second choice, third choice, so on and so forth, and eventually it gets to the point where there are only two candidates remaining in the general, and whoever wins a majority will win you know, will win the election unless they get, a majority beforehand. Mike Dunleavy is pretty popular in the state, from what I understand. Bill Walker, the former independent governor, is running for his old job again. He dropped out in 2018 to allow Mark Begich, the Democratic nominee and former U.S. Senator from Alaska, to challenge Dunleavy, because and he agreed to do that. That's why he got so little of the vote in 2018, but Begich still lost to Dunleavy. Yeah, and I think that this race could be competitive. I did have it as safe R briefly. I think it'll be more competitive than well, I don't know if I'd say more competitive than the Senate election. The Senate election is between two Republicans, but that'll be more interesting to watch. So yeah, keep an eye on Alaska. Might be interesting there, but besides that, I don't have a lot to say there. Instead of Texas, in the state of Texas, I got it still as likely Republican. There was a new poll out a couple days ago, or I saw it yesterday. Um, it showed Greg Abbott leading Beto O'Rourke, by I think it was 8 or 9 points, or no, 7 to 8 points. The 538 average now has him up by 9. So, there was, Greg Abbott is pretty good candidate for the state of Texas. He won by 13 points in 2018 when O'Rourke came within 3 points of beating Ted Cruz in the concurrent Senate election. Beto O'Rourke is a much better candidate. He's probably the best candidate to take on Greg Abbott. With that being said, Texas is still a red state. It is moving towards swing state status. You can't really deny that. But you also have to remember that Greg Abbott does have a lot of appeal. He's not very popular in Texas, and a lot of the Uvalde shooting, the Texas power grid, abortion. A lot of that is going to help Beto O'Rourke. I've seen videos of him convincing Republicans to vote for him, and I think O'Rourke will outperform these polling averages. I think Abbott will only win by about 5 or 6 points, but that's still a likely margin. This could go down to lean. So yeah, just keep an eye out for the state of Texas. But right now, I think the environment is too red for Beto O'Rourke to really have too much of a chance of winning. But he's going to make this race interesting, so keep an eye on Texas. The last likely state for the Republicans is the state of Florida. Ron DeSantis, very popular there. Very, rumored to be a 2024 presidential candidate. I agree with that statement. I think he will run for president. Charlie Crist is probably going to be the Democratic nominee. Crist was the former Republican governor of Florida. Ran for Senate in 2010. As in the Republican primary, he dropped out, ran as an independent, split the vote with the Democratic candidate, and as a result, Marco Rubio was elected in 2010. because if you combine the votes of Kendrick Meek, the Democratic nominee, and Chris votes against Rubio's, Rubio would lose. Of course, that might not have happened. There were still Republicans that voted for Christ, and so I would have, but that's a hypothetical. And DeSantis is pretty popular in the state. He pulled off a surprise victory in 2018. Andrew Gillum was expected to flip this race for Democrats. It was very close. And while Florida is still a swing state, 2022's Senate and governor elections, while they do serve, as competitive races, they are not really two viable options for or viable races for Democrats to flip. And I think Ron DeSantis is going to win here by around 9, 10, maybe 11 points, somewhere around there. I think he will do slightly worse than Marco Rubio, but that's not really saying much. This state is probably going to be a likely state, but I do think it'll be more competitive than the Senate election because Charlie Crist is a better candidate. If Nikki Fried gets the nomination, I could even see putting the state as safe, but I think even that's a bit of a stretch. Then I think it's about 12 points. So that's it for the likely states. Now we're going to fill in one more likely state I forgot to characterize for Democrats, the state of Minnesota. Tim Walz is running for his reelection, the Democratic governor there. He won in 2018 by about 11 points, I believe. Yeah, so he has a lot of room to fall. There were primaries here in Minnesota this past week. Or last week, I guess now, because it's Monday. It's August 15th when I'm recording this. And he has a lot of room to fall from his previous election. This race could be competitive. I'm going to put it as likely. I don't know exactly if it's going to be a likely or lean margin, but this poll sponsored by Scott Jensen, the Republican nominee's campaign, had him losing by 4. That's probably going to be, it is within the margin of error. I will give him that. This is the least amount of undecided voters, but it's probably overestimating Republican support here. Yeah, and there's a lot of undecideds here in these more closely watched polls. Something to look at with Minnesota, but it is historically a Democratic state, definitely getting more competitive with the rest of the Rust Belt. But I think Scott Jensen's going to have a hard time winning against Tim Walz, who's a pretty popular incumbent from my understanding. So we got 9 more races to characterize. These are going to be the lean and tilt states. So we're going to start with the lean states. These are states that are going to be decided by percentage by margins of 1 to 5 percentage points. Sorry, and these races could really go either way. But the lean states, I would say, I have much more confidence in how they're going to go than the tilt states. So we're going to start off with some of the lean Democratic states. We're going to start off with the state of New Mexico. This race is surprisingly competitive. Michelle Lujan Grisham is the incumbent Democratic governor who's running for re-election against Mark Ronchetti, the Republican nominee. He ran for Senate in 2020. Only lost to Ben Ray Lujan by 6 points. He outperformed President Trump in the state by about 5 points. It was actually pretty impressive. Impressive showing for Ronchetti. He definitely could pull off a bank shot and win in New Mexico, but you have to remember that despite Lujan Grisham's scandals and her unpopularity, New Mexico is still a blue state. And yeah, while this could be another case of Virginia, going red because New Mexico and Virginia's margins for Biden were pretty similar in 2020. New Mexico was slightly bluer, I believe. Ron Chetty definitely has a chance, but he is no Glenn Youngkin. He is, a weatherman. And, he is an outsider, I will give him that, but he also is a rerun. Well, he's not necessarily a rerun candidate for this office. He's definitely running in the right year, but he's also running against an incumbent who is unpopular, but his own internal only shows him up by 1 point. Granted, he should not be up in his own poll, but in this, it still shows him winning by only 1 percentage point. Excuse me, I am having the hiccups today. Next lean state we're going to have for Democrats is the state of Oregon. Oregon is surprisingly competitive in its governor elections. Kate Brown, the current Democratic governor of the state, only won by 6 points in 2018 in a blue wave year. Oregon has not elected a Republican governor in 40 years. Yeah, 40 years. It was 1982 was the last time that Oregon elected a Republican governor. Tina Kotek is the Democratic nominee. Christine Drazan is the Republican nominee. And while this race is going to be competitive, the thing that makes it really worrying for Democrats is Betsy Johnson, a former Democrat who served in the Oregon state legislature. She has, presented herself as a moderate, and she has been moving to the right recently, which I think gives Tina Kotek a big boost. The state voted for Biden by 16 points. I think, it is going to vote for Tina Kotek. I don't really see Christine Drazan winning, but I could definitely see Oregon being an upset flip for Republicans. There are a lot of undecided voters, and Betsy Johnson is not going to get 24% of the vote. I don't believe she is that strong of a candidate. I think Tina Kotek will win, but I don't think it will be. I think it will be under 5%, but I still think it'll be comfortable enough. This race, she'll have to watch out for 2026 if she does end up winning. If 2026 is an even redder year if Biden gets reelected, then yeah, expect, but I could definitely see Oregon going red. It's tougher for Democrats to hold on to than New Mexico. They have an independent running, a moderate independent who used to be a Democrat, and it's also an open race. So yeah, keep an eye on Oregon. Something's happening there, but yeah, I don't think it's going red right now. In the state of Maine, we got Janet Mills running for her reelection against the former Republican governor of the state, Paul LePage. Paul LePage is a pretty controversial figure. He's made some racially insensitive comments, and he was pretty much the presumptive reason, I would say, why Maine has adopted ranked choice voting. He did win without a majority of the vote both times. In 2010, look at how many LePage didn't even get 40% of the popular vote. This was the most Lincoln scenario you can think of. Um, LePage only won by 2 points in 2010. There's a lot of vote splitting. In 2014, he couldn't even get a majority. He won by 5 points. He really should have won. LePage was not that great of a candidate, and he was very unpopular during his second term. He won against Michael McCaul, but I think that he would have lost had there not been this independent candidate in the race. In 2018, Janet Mills only won by about 8 points, which is concerning for her. I don't really think Janet Mills is that inspiring of a candidate. Maine really likes to reelect their politicians, though. And LePage was very unpopular in his second term, as I've said. He has proclaimed himself as Trump before Trump. That's not going to help you in the state that rejected Trump twice. Maine was pretty close in 2016, only voted for Hillary Clinton by about 3 points. But yeah, there could something could happen in Maine, but I don't think that LePage really has the same support that he did in the past, especially with this controversy and with Maine's ranked choice voting system. The final lean state that I have for Democrats is the state of Pennsylvania with Josh Shapiro versus Doug Mastriano. Doug Mastriano, I think, I think people are underestimating him. I think he could definitely pull off a bank shot and win this race. Tom Wolf is not a very popular incumbent Democratic governor. I think the main problem for him is his rhetoric, and, he is, I would say, I think the reason why I'm so apprehensive about this race is because even though Shapiro is a very good candidate, the incumbent attorney general got the most votes for a Pennsylvania Democrat, I believe, or for a Pennsylvania politician in history in 2020. He outperformed Joe Biden in the state by like 4 or 5 points. And so it's going to be very hard for Shapiro to beat or to be beaten by Mastriano. This race will still be competitive. I don't think it is a likely state. I think it's a lean state. But honestly, it's going to take a lot for Mastriano to win. But then again, that's what we said about Trump in 2016, and look how that turned out. Polls have been pretty favorable to Shapiro. They do have a lot of undecided voters. And Fox News, these are registered voters, which, registered voters are not a very good way to predict elections. It's better to use likely voters because, registered voters don't always, not all of them always vote. Likely voters are, more likely to vote. And some of these earlier polls were pretty competitive between the two. I think Shapiro, though, does have the advantage. It's going to take a lot for Pennsylvania to go red. But if they are super dissatisfied with, Tom Wolf's performance and, as governor and, who, won in 2018 by a very large margin. But if they're still if Wolf is super unpopular and it's really hard for, Shapiro to appeal to a lot of those voters, I could, absolutely see this race, going in a different direction. We have one lean Republican state, that is the state of Georgia. A lot of people, I think, have been kind of dooming on Stacey Abrams. Brian Kemp, was the right call for Republicans. I once thought that Georgia had a better chance of going blue for Stacey Abrams than Warnock had in his Senate election, holding on against Herschel Walker. I think that that's completely changed. And, there has been the argument made that, if Kemp is winning by 5 or 6 points, how is Warnock going to be able to win? There's not going to be that much vote splitting. I don't know exactly how true. I understand that statement, but honestly, Stacey Abrams, is a much more controversial candidate. There was, she did. I think that her claims about election fraud in 2018 are going to hurt her. I'm not going to get into that. I don't want to politicize this too much. I mean, this is about politics, but I don't want to get too much of my personal opinion on here. She did do very well in 2018. I did have this race as likely before, but more recent polls have been showing this race getting a little bit closer. And Stacey Abrams, even though Georgia's a pro-choice state, it is not quite as it does not have the Roe v. Wade being overturned is not going to help Abrams as much as it would, say Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania. This one poll, I didn't see this. This must have come out recently. Does have Kemp leading Abrams by about 7 points. But these more recent polls, this was registered voters. But these more recent polls have been showing a bit of a more competitive race, so I think the Kemp wins by just under 5 as of right now. So we got these four final states, and I think that these are complete toss-ups. These are the tilt states, the states that go for either party by a margin of under 1% or 1 percentage point. We're going to fill in them one by one. We're going to start off with the state of Wisconsin. This will give Republicans the majority of governorships in the National Governors Association. I do think, this is a bit of a hot take, but I think Tim Michaels is a better candidate, or not better candidate, a worse candidate than Rebecca Kleefich would have been to take on Tony Evers, the current Democratic governor. Uh, Evers really needs to pull off a bank shot in the state of Wisconsin. He only won by 1 point in a blue wave year against a very unpopular Republican incumbent, Scott Walker. He was a pretty strong candidate in the years past, but he was not popular, certainly by the time of 2018. And I think it's going to be very hard for Evers considering how much gridlock there's been in the Wisconsin state legislature. He has not really gotten a lot of his ideas, put through, a lot of his agenda put through because of the supermajority that the GOP has in the state legislature of Wisconsin. And while I think, Michaels is a better candidate for Evers to take on because, or better for Evers because I think Evers has a better chance at winning against Michaels than he did against Cleefitch. I still think that it's going to be a close race. This is a complete toss-up in my opinion, but I do think Michaels has a very narrow advantage. In the state of Nevada, I'm going to put that as tilt Democrat or Democratic. I think Steve Sisolak is strong enough to win his reelection. Joe Lombardo is a good candidate, but abortion is going to be on Nevada voters' minds, especially in the Las Vegas area of Clark County, which is where Joe Lombardo is from. I think Laxalt in the Senate election will help Lombardo, and Cortez Masto will help Sisolak. They will, and vice versa. They will each help each other. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw a Laxalt victory in the Senate election and a Sisolak re-election in the governor's election. Right now I do have the Senate election as tilt blue as well. I don't think Joe Lombardo is as good of a candidate as Adam Laxalt is, and I think Laxalt is going to bring Lombardo down a little bit because I think Lombardo appears as more moderate than Laxalt, but Laxalt's comments, or his comments about abortion and also his involvement in trying to overturn Nevada's 2020 election results are going to hurt, um, hurt Lombardo in the state of Nevada. On top of that, Sisolak was able to beat Laxalt in 2018 when he was the Republican nominee for governor. When Laxalt was and Sisolak was the Democratic nominee. Sisolak, according to the polls, was going to lose this race. Nevada polls underestimated Sisolak by almost 4%. And, while this wasn't an impressive margin for Sisolak, the fact that he was able to outperform odds and defeat a statewide incumbent or statewide office holder is pretty impressive when he hadn't held statewide office before. Correct me if I'm wrong. So I think Sisolak definitely has the advantage in the state of Nevada, but I could see this race going red. It's pretty much a true toss-up. I'm going to move Arizona back into the Democratic column right here. I pretty much called it. I don't want to pat myself too much on the back in Arizona, but I did say that this Emerson poll between Carrie Lake and Karen Taylor Robson was indicating a competitive race. Carrie Lake won by far less than 9 points, and Emerson is pretty accurate in the state of Arizona. They had Doug Ducey winning his reelection in 2018 by about 15 points. He ended up winning by 14. Biden was expected to win, I think, in Arizona, according to Emerson, by 1 point. He won by 0.3. So they're pretty accurate in the state of Arizona. Everyone was expecting this as a blowout for Kerry Lake. And, I was right in, saying that I think Kerry Lake will win. But, Karen Taylor Robson got a lot. She didn't get as close as I thought she would, but, this was still a pretty competitive race. All the counties went for Lake, but, some of them by pretty small margins. Maricopa County, look at that. That was a pretty close margin right there. I think Katie Hobbs is going to have a hard time in Maricopa County with some more moderate Republicans like the McCain types, but so is Lake. As I said in my Senate election prediction video last time, or, yesterday, I think, Lake Masters is worse than Kerry Lake in terms of electability, but only slightly. We're comparing apples to oranges. As I said, Lake has a slightly more appeal, but she is still, a nut. She is a pretty radical candidate. So is Katie Hobbs, but I think, Katie Hobbs being a statewide elected official and Carrie Lake being, a cuckoo nut. No offense to anyone who supports Carrie Lake, but I mean, yeah. Carrie Lake is probably going to lose this race. She could win it. This race is a dead toss-up in my mind, but I think Katie Hobbs is going to get a lot of support from Maricopa County. Not as much as Mark Kelly, though. In the final state, in the state of Kansas, last time I had this state, or in my last prediction, I said that I thought that that abortion referendum could really change my mind if it went either way. If voters rejected the resolution, it could hurt Democrats because it meant that they didn't really care about. Well, I mean, I thought what I mean to say is that I think if it got rejected. Or if it passed, if it passed, then I think that that would have motivated a lot of female voters in Kansas to turn out because it was a pretty bad date for people to let them know. It was actually a pretty good date for the GOP to put it on the ballot because there would be less turnout. It was a primary election and a midterm election year. But surprisingly, Kansas overwhelmingly rejected this. And while I said that this might mean that even though they supported even though they may have supported abortion, that doesn't necessarily mean they're automatically going to vote for Laura Kelly. But I'm going to put it as tilt D right now. I think Kansas is going to be the closest race of this gubernatorial election cycle. I think Derek Schmidt very well could win. I've had him favored. I've had this race as lean Republican throughout the entirety of my predictions, but I think Kelly has enough momentum to win, especially with female voters. Kansas is a state that voted for Trump by 15 points in 2020. Kelly is extremely popular in the state. And while Chris Kobach is not, I mean, he is on the ballot. He's running for attorney general, I believe. Um, and this race could, I think Chris Kobach could bring Derek Schmidt down. Derek Schmidt's the current attorney general of Kansas, and he is a better fit to take on Kelly. I had him as the favorite. I think it's going to be very hard for Kelly, but she has the momentum right now, and so that's why I think that she's going to win by a razor thin margin as of right now. But Schmidt could easily take this away. So this is my current map for the 2022 governor's elections as of August 15th, 2022. My mid-August update: Republicans get 26 seats in the governor's association. Democrats get 24. Republicans flip the state of Wisconsin, while Democrats flip Massachusetts, Maryland, and Arizona, while holding on to Kansas, surprisingly enough. So yeah, that is it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Please remember to like and subscribe to the channel, and like the video. Share it, turn on notifications. Check out my main channel, Interaction127, which is non-political. If you want to hang out and watch some of my reaction videos or video game walkthroughs, hang out, have a good time. Hope this video wasn't so long. I don't believe it was as long as my previous video, but yeah, I'll see you guys next time when I talk about all things politics. And yeah, hopefully this video wasn't so long. I'll see you guys soon, and I think I'm gonna make a video talking about Liz Cheney's primary. Again, expect my next governor election prediction to be a little bit later. But yeah, I hope you guys, have a great day, and I'll see you later.